the 22nd episode of the Critical Fools podcast. This week, we're going to be discussing a 2007 film titled Sunshine, directed by Danny Boyle. We've actually covered one of his films already, Trainspotting. The quick synopsis of this film, just so that the viewers, if you haven't seen it, can get a glimpse of what we're going to discuss. Is the Earth is a sci-fi film. The Earth is kind of like gone through. It's on the verge of basically a disaster, right? Because it's going to freeze. And basically, I think it's 8 crew members they're on this shuttle called Icarus 2. And their job basically is to detonate a bomb into the sun to, I think, like shift it so that it will like shine light on the Earth. And the story is, even though that's like the big like high level synopsis, the movie's really about like 8 individuals who are in this pressure situation and how they interact and like the different kind of like the human aspect of like, even though you have a bigger goal, you're still human, and your day to day, your small decisions impact like obviously the greater picture. And so I'll leave it at that, and I'll let you kick off with it's definitely a different type of movie that than we've covered recently. So I'm curious about like when you started watching it, like what's your initial thoughts and feelings and.
So I'll first say, I think what the actual mission of the trip is that the sun's dying. So rather than tilt the angle, I think they were trying to like restart, as in they say, create a star from a star. Right. I think that was the whole. Like, there's a lot of different. You can poke holes at that sort of concept quite a bit, because I don't think that the physics would actually work on that. But I'm not a physics expert or an astrophysicist. But that was sort of the main plot, is that they wanted to sort of re-energize the sun again, because as you see at the end of the movie, the Earth is just completely like frozen. I mean, Australia looked like it was Antarctica. My initial thoughts on this film were that it was good. It was felt like a lot of the main storyline I'd seen in many other science fiction films of this genre, but it had its own little twist in some of the scenes that were chosen and the angles that were used in the directing style. And I'll refer to like what I mean later on once we get to the scenes. I thought the acting was good. I didn't realize Chris Evans, like this was probably one of Chris Evans' first, major films, at least that I'm aware of. I mean, everyone I think knows him at this point as Captain America. I thought that what was pretty funny was I had I'd take a double take when they showed the character Dr. Seal. Cyril? I don't know how to say his name exactly. Searle. He's the psychologist.
Yeah.
But the actual actor, Cliff Curtis, I did a double take because I was like, wow, I haven't seen you like that actor in a film in quite a while. I think the first time I'd ever seen him was in Training Day. Played one of the best characters in that movie, in my opinion. But I thought from just the acting performances, they were very good. I mean, I've always liked Cillian Murphy ever since I saw him in Batman Begins as Scarecrow. And I don't know if I've ever seen a film where he's quite disappointed me, or I came away with like lower, expectations from his acting. But yeah. Overall, I thought there were great acting performances throughout this film. And yeah, I'll leave it at that. Those were sort of some of my initial takes. I thought this reminded me a bit, I don't know if you've ever seen The Martian, Chris, but some of the plant rooms, some of these concepts about surviving in space, they were covered in films, after this movie was made, and in science fiction films before it was.
Yeah, I've seen The Martian, it's a good film. I wouldn't say it's like it's
the book is better. Much better.
What I will say about this film is that what caught me off guard, going off your point about the cast, is that I remember the first 20 minutes, I was like, oh, you're in this movie? Like, Chris Evans is the easy one.
Yeah.
But even I think I forgot her name, but it's she
is
was
it
in
Cassie? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, because she was in Troy. She was in Troy, and I've seen that movie a bunch of times. And she's been in other films too. And I was like, "You're in this too." Murphy, I knew he was in this film because I seen like trailer and the clips. But there's others. I was just like, "Oh, you're in this movie as well." This film is like,
it's some heavy hitters in acting.
Yeah, and that's why I think like the acting was actually really high quality, because like and I think it makes sense. Like it does this film service because a lot of the kind of like, let's say, excluding like the end, let's say like that last 20-minute stretch, most of the film is really around conversations and around dialogue. So I think having a strong cast helps the movie, and gives
it was really about a lot of the fears and anxieties and really some existentialism
yes.
throughout the film. I mean, those were some of the main themes.
Yeah.
But, is there anything that really stood out to you in this film in terms of certain scenes?
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, starting off that is that even though, like, I think, in my opinion, the beginning was a little bit slow, mainly because they're introducing a lot of characters and a lot of the kind of like what's the term, like, what's the plot line, right? Like, this is their mission and stuff. But
they're setting this, they're quote unquote setting the scene.
Yeah, I think like the first, I think where like it really starts kicking off is when they have that big conversation around. So the context is that they're on Icarus 2. And they're actually I guess they're the backup ship, right? The original plan was Icarus 1, and if everything went well, then they wouldn't even have to do anything Icarus 2.
And for the sake of the timeline, it was 7 years prior was Icarus 1's mission, and then they lost contact something like 6 months in.
So they're really like I don't want to say backup because they're trained like if they're like, this is the most important mission of human history. But they were basically, there was there was a previous mission that if it went well, they would not even be needed, right? And I forgot who is it. Oh, that's the other actor too that I didn't recognize who's in this film. Harvey, that guy, I think it's Harvey. So first time I saw I don't know if is it Harvey? Hold up.
Yeah, it's Harvey. Harvey.
Yeah, because I think it's Harvey. Yeah, so where I actually saw him first was Ballers, which is an interesting TV show.
I haven't seen that.
But well, I don't want to get too much in that. I would just say I only recommend like the first 3 seasons, but it gets lame a bit after. But anyways, I think he's the one that discovers the distress signal. I don't remember exactly who, but I think it's either him or the
because he's the communications person on board.
And so the movie really starts kicking off once you have this kind of like first challenge, right? Like, do they deviate their course to get the first payload to be their backup payload, the bomb, or they just continue the mission, right? And so I think they have a vote about it, right? And
at that point they don't have a vote. Chris Evans' character is fully against going to Icarus 2 all right, so it's first brought up, like you said, there's a disagreement as to whether they should go to Icarus 1 or just maintain their course and drop off the payload at the sun. And what ends up happening is the captain says, "No, we're not a democracy. We're like it was actually Cliff Curtis's character basically makes the case, if we, he's like, we sort of have a dilemma on our hands. He's like, on the one hand, we can go and we can drop off the bomb, like basically keep going with our current trajectory, our current mission, and see if that'll work." And he's like, however, and he's like, because in his mind, he's like, we all, I think, agree that saving a few lives that could possibly still be alive on Icarus 1 is not worth putting humanity in jeopardy.
Yeah.
But he says, on the other hand, he's like, going to Icarus 1 could be a potentially good move for us to save humanity, because if their payload is still working, aka their bomb, then we would have 2 bombs, which means 2 times the strength and double the possibility, because it is still an insane mission, right? And there's a lot of physics and things that could disrupt the success of their current mission. So they said if they have 2 bombs, it's at least 2 times the chance that their mission will work. And so Chris Evans says, all right, well, we should take a vote on this, his character. And basically the captain, I'm trying to remember his name, Kaneda, he basically says, no, we're not a democracy in this room. He's like, we're not going to leave it up to that. He's like, we're a bunch of scientists and engineers. He's like, and so with the information on hand, we should leave it to our expert. And that was the physicist, who is Kappa. And so Kappa is basically like, wow, that's a lot. And Cillian Murphy did a great job, because you can just see the amount of pressure that it just puts on one person to decide. You're basically deciding the fate of humanity. And if you choose wrong, everything goes to hell.
Yeah, that was right. It was the captain. He basically relied on one person's opinion,
Yep.
right? It was Kappa's Murphy's character,
Who's the expert?
and yeah, and it's because he was the which is interesting is that later in the film, right, they go a different route because they recognize that perhaps that's not fair on such a high stakes mission, right? And but yes, like you're right, Kaneda, he basically tells Murphy, right, like, or sorry, I should say his actual character's name, Kappa, like, whatever you decide, we're going with. And have you decided yet? Because there's that scene there's interesting like scenes where like it's sci-fi, right? So that there's that white room and he's staring at the I think like at some monitor or outer space or maybe the sun. I forgot what he's staring at, but he's talking to him as he's not facing him, right? And he makes a decision that yes, like all the logic.
You're talking about the sunroom. Oh no, yeah, that was a simulation room.
Simulation room. The sunroom is where like the sun's like burning in their face. But this is like that scene that you were describing earlier that like, hey, we're gonna go with what you decide, and he's kind of balancing in his mind like, okay, the logic is this, but obviously I understand like the other opinion, right? But like he decides to go with, and he actually makes this kind of decision throughout the movie, right? What I would say is the utilitarian decision, right? Like whatever increases our odds to succeed, we do, no matter what the human element or what we think like person to person might be the right decision. And I think what's interesting about like, and this is one of the conflicts of the movie, right? Like James Mace, I think his name is Chris Evans' character, and Kappa, they seem to be like, they even fight a little bit. They have some mini scuffles, but they they have this like, what's the term? They have this like different viewpoints of like how they should make decisions and what should be valuable, right? And we see with Kappa's characters, often it's whatever gives us a decision, and we'll discuss a later scene when where he says like, are you really asking me like if one person is more important than
humanity? Saving humanity is his optimal choice.
Yeah, and so that I think that's where the movie kicks off a little bit because they make this decision, right? And then that scientist, I'm gonna say physicist, Trey, I think his name is Trey. He makes a slight error because he's having to do something that he wasn't like they didn't prepare for, right? They didn't prepare to go off course in this mission, right? And he makes one mathematical error, which is obviously in this kind of like high stakes. I even think of like what we do today, right? With like not Tesla, SpaceX and NASA, right? Like these small, like what happened with Challenger, right? Any small errors can lead to disaster, right? And so there's
you have to be accurate to like the 8th decimal point. Where
there's no room for error, right? And he makes a blunder, right? And then they have this dilemma, right, with the sun shield. So I wanted to talk about this specific scene. I know I'm missing some details, but I love
because he forgets what he ends up doing is he forgets to adjust the ship shields for the correction of the 1.1 degree angle.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is it burns some of the panels because the panels are no longer protected from the shield.
Yeah, and he's totally distraught about it. And he obviously we learn later that he's basically on suicide watch. But it leads us to, I think, the first, like, I can see why people like this movie a lot because there's some scenes in this movie that I actually rewatched like a few times because I was like, wow, this is perfect music, perfect like sci-fi.
Oh,
like, if I saw this on IMAX, I would have been like, it's so amazing because like they go out to do like him and Kappa go out to fix the sun show, right? And spoiler alert, everybody. Kaneda tells Kappa to go back, get yourself out of here. I'll finish the job, and then he just kind of like gives up, I guess, with trying to save himself.
He knew he would have no time.
Yeah, and
he's like, it was over, and basically in his view, he's like it was more important for him to finish that than for his own life.
Yeah, and then you have this I want to say iconic scene where he's basically facing the fury of the star, and the psychiatrist is like he's also obsessed about. We'll get into what the sun represents, but he's asking like, what do you see because he's so close, right? And then obviously he dies. But that scene itself was like really, I found it to be well crafted, well directed. It hit like all these notes, and the music was great. So
I felt like the music was underappreciated in this film. Like it was set very perfectly for what the like they were trying to evoke out of the audience's emotions. At least my personal emotions, I felt. But yeah, I mean, just going back to like him on the on the communications, like I guess you would call it, like the walkie-talkie, like trying to communicate with Kaneda. Yeah, the psychologist was very obsessed. He's like, "What do you see?" Because he really wants to see the sun, right? And it keeps over and over just asking what he sees, and that goes back to even the opening scene in this, where he's in the sunroom and he keeps telling Icarus to adjust. He's like, "Can you?" He was even looking at the sun, and he's like, "What percentage am I seeing of the sun?" And he's like, 2% intensity. And he's like, "Can you adjust it all the way?" She's like, "No, it'll irreversibly damage your retinas. However, you can look at it at 3.1% intensity." And he's like, "Okay." He's like, "That's good enough. I want to at least see that." And he sees it, and he's just blown away by like him seeing that. Like that was enough juice to get him, because any more would just, he wouldn't survive. He'd go blind, and potentially have irreversible skin damage. Right, you would die, as we see in a later scene from some people that they found in a different sunroom.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was gonna say like that scene, like I guess we both agree that like it was probably like one of the scenes in this film, right? And I think, when I was watching this after I finished it, I was kind of like digesting like why did people really like this film? Because when we get to the ratings, I'll get into deeper, but I think that this scene is definitely one that sticks in the mind, and it's just very well crafted, and I think it's, since people still talk about this movie, I'm assuming that there's a couple other scenes I think that also hit this tone, and they all revolve around the sun, ironically. But I think these the type of scenes that make, I think, the fans of this movie still like watch it and talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can see, like, I had never heard of this film before watching it, but I can see why I'm sure it has a cult following, because it had some very strong moments, and then I would say it had some weaker ones, even though I get where they were going with the film. But I wanted to ask you, so what did you think about Mace's character, the engineer?
Yeah, he felt to me like the most like human like character, in the sense that like he thought the mission was important, and when it came to like not deviating from the plan, he didn't think it was worth the risk, right? Because maybe the payload doesn't work, or maybe there's no survivors. It's like he in the beginning it seemed like he was risk adverse, and yet other times he made decisions where he trusted the human element, right? Like I remember the scene where Cassie, I think she wants to like move the ship, right? Like she wants to take over manual controls, right? And Kaneda says don't do it, and earlier in the movie, right, like James kind of like fights Kaneda on some things, and this time he was just like, no. He looks at Cassie and says like, no, just let it go, So you're right. His character was interesting because like it seemed like your first impression is that this guy is just I'm a boot soldier, I'm by the book. But then as the movie goes along, you start seeing that he makes decisions based off like the opposite of Kappa, right? He makes decisions based off like his gut, his intuition, like what he
Which is gut. Yeah, and I think that probably stems from his character in the movie has sort of some military background. So I'm sure that stems by like you go with your gut, like you second guess yourself, and that's how like bad things happen, right? Yeah. And his whole thing is like, let's not take any unnecessary risks. He's like, we need this mission to work, and he thinks that any deviant actions from this mission will just complicate things, which that inevitably does happen in the film.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to ask you too. There was one scene. I don't know if you want to go in order or not. I was just going to ask you like another scene that sort of stuck out
with this movie,
because I think
with this.
I think we kind of like are.
Go ahead.
I mean, you sort of gave a synopsis of what this movie's about, so I don't know if we necessarily have to go in order with this. But one of the things that I found interesting was, and I think it kind of paid some homage to even what was, I mean, this thing has been brought out in many different films, specifically I think Jurassic Park and Michael Crichton's movie and book, was that life sort of finds a way and you sort of are to survive and flourish. And that scene is clearly evident when I forgot who was her character, who was the botanist. trying to remember. It was not Cassie. It was Corazon. When she goes into the room where it was the auction plant room. When she goes in and she finds the little leaf sprout out from the ashes, right? And so I was like, oh, that was a cool scene, but sadly so, she dies immediately after. But it is apparent that, and it was very interesting imagery that Pinbacker actually puts the plant into her hands while she's dead there. I wanted to get your opinion on that scene and like why he chose to do that and what that represents.
Yeah, and to your earlier question about jumping around, I'm okay jumping around, but we'll probably have to give some color around to that scene. Is that so? You mentioned that what's her name, Corazon? She gets stabbed. I know a scene you're talking about, but she gets stabbed by a character that. So basically, what we skipped over slightly, and we'll come back to it. Is they jump to Icarus 1. There's some scenes there we'll discuss because there were some interesting scenes there, but there was actually a survivor. The one survivor was the captain, and you're right. You named him hold on, what was his
Pinbacker.
name? Pinbacker. And he's the one that he looks actually, you don't really see his face, which is interesting. We'll get to that.
Yeah. But there's clearly some disfigurement.
Yeah, it's clearly whatever happened to him at Icarus Run wasn't pretty. But he stabs her, and then you're right. He puts the plant in the little leaf or the little sprout in her hands, and I think that goes into his character a little bit. That's why I wanted to give some color. Like he was the one survivor and stuff, and I guess he let his crew die, but like how he positioned them was interesting. Like we'll get to that scene in the
sunroom.
It's almost that scene. So there's a couple of things I'll break down there. In my opinion, is that I think he kills her because he mentions it to Kappa that like the end of humanity is salvation, and you hear this a lot from the people who are very fanatical and zealot like, and I think he understands like killing her is actually not a moral act, but it's a necessary one. And so even when she's like he has to kill her.
Well, he
doesn't want to treat her like just like throw her to the dogs or just like dump her in outer space. He still had like kind of like this human rationality of like, I'm stabbing you, but I don't want you just to like be afraid of death. You should embrace it. Because I view his character as somebody who, we don't get any more detail what happened on Icarus 1, but it's kind of inferred that he went mad, and he starts basically the way he acts is what you see often with, in my opinion, religious zealots, or any type of zealotry, or like people who are like worshiping whatever that's a fictional or a deity or in person or an idea, right? And for him, it looks like it's the sun concept, which is his they never really meet, but like they're him and the psychologist, they have some interesting like touch points, and that was kind of like my breakdown of it, is that like he is portrayed as crazy, but he's not as crazy as you think he is. I'm curious about what I guess, why did that scene stick out to you? Is it just because the life, even though there was a lot of death,
it was weird crowded? Because what was just interesting was that I guess what the scene was sort of represented is from death comes life, right? That's the only thing I got, because it was weird because that her character was stabbed to death, and like you would think that was going to be the end of it, but it's not. Like they go back after a specific scene and they cut back to her character, just they're dead in the position, and just in the palm of her hand is this little flower sprout. And so it was kind of interesting that I was like, why exactly they decide to like show that scene specifically? I don't know. It was just something that just interesting how certain scenes kind of stick out to you. That one for some reason kind of did.
Yeah, what was a scene that I liked, I think it's a bit earlier actually, is that before things go to real disaster mode, I like how Cassie tells Kappa that like, we're all thinking it, like we're all going to die here.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to say it, but we all know deep down we're going to die here. And nobody says it, like Kappa doesn't say anything. But as the movie goes, like towards the end, I was just like, oh, you know what? In the end, she was 100% right. Like everybody did die.
Well, yeah, but everybody knew that. Yeah. You knew as soon as the auction room got burned down, they weren't going to survive.
Yes. Yeah, because that was their food supply, and they were relying on oxygen, but they were running out, right? And then that's how actually Kappa figures out that there's an extra person that snuck on them. Because so rolling back, right? They go to Icarus 1, and then they discover
the two air ducts between connecting the two ships becomes destroyed, and they find out later that it was manually detached. There was no freak accident. just purposely done. There was some somebody did it.
Yeah, which is your first hint that like somebody survived Icarus 1 or somebody.
Well, no, they put blame on Trey at first, if you recall.
Yeah, at first, but like you know what it is, I didn't buy. Oh, so maybe that's a good discussion point. Even when I was watching it, I didn't buy that because this guy was really distraught, and they even said he was sedated, right? And I was thinking like, if this is like sci-fi, there's no way the guy is sedated. I've seen people take sedation drugs, and they're not moving around. Okay, in my experience, like they're only in the room, maybe. So I had a hard time believing that he walked out, and then like basically, I guess I don't know if it's a critique or I'm being too harsh on it. I just didn't buy that. I already was kind of suspicious.
Yeah, but you didn't know.
I didn't know about the pinker, so I didn't know about that person surviving. But I was kind of gleaming that like something, and obviously it gets confirmed later with, we have 5 people here taking oxygen, not 4. But I had already kind of like a little suspicion. That's why when the reveal came, I wasn't really shocked. I don't know if you were shocked, but
not really.
Because I like you said, they blame Trey because obviously in their minds, right, logically, they don't buy that there could have been a survivor.
The reason I didn't buy
go ahead.
The reason I didn't buy Trey doing it initially was like, makes no sense. Why would he do it?
Exactly, no motive.
If anything, he was sad, right? Because he was all about the mission. He felt so horrible when Kaneda died. Why would he kill everybody else? I was not surprised when they were like, it looked like he had committed suicide, but I didn't buy that he was the one who, purposely put others in danger.
In my opinion, I mean, they did the pinbacker thing, but it would have been more believable if, like, let's say Kappa and the guy that took over after Kaneda's death, what's his name? Harvey went, and then there was tension. Whether was it Trey, was it James? Like, if James had stayed behind, I could have bought that. I could have bought like, oh, maybe he manually detached it.
James.
Yeah, like if he had stayed back, but he went with them, so he obviously didn't do it. But if somebody my whole point is that if somebody more believable maybe stayed back on the Icarus 2, I might have been able to been more surprised by the pinbacker reveal versus like, oh yeah, of course somebody survived. Like, somebody detached that thing. There's all these little
little hints.
But yeah, that scene's actually cool too. It's not one of my favorites, but the whole when they have to it's been detached and now they have to jettison over, and then Harvey
I actually dislike that scene. And maybe it's the scientific background of me, but
that did not look realistic. But I thought
it wasn't just that. It's like there's no way you were going to be able to survive for even a second at negative 273 degrees. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, your body.
I've dealt with liquid nitrogen plenty of times, and that is cold as hell, and that's negative 70. You exposed for that for like 3 seconds, you're gonna like burn your hand, man.
Yeah.
Negative 273, you're gonna be frozen like an ice cube. And they had to go something like 30 meters. Yeah. You're gonna be exposed for like at least 7-8 seconds. It depends on what force, but yeah.
That's also, they make it seem like they had a lot of force, but even when they did that explosion, I was like, are they really moving that fast? Like, like I have a hard time believing that.
It depends, right? The other thing I will say is, as cool as it kind of looked at first, I actually thought that the suits that they had them wear were just super funky and unnecessary.
Oh yeah, they look like we had it in like that because
dude, they look like. When Cillian Murphy's character fell down and he was trying to get up within that suit, it looked like he was on a golden armadillo.
Yeah, even though that scene was awesome because of the music, but rolling back a little bit, I think also we have the benefit of we've seen technology progress, and we've seen what SpaceX.
It was just so funny. I was like, it looks like.
And we're like, wow, that's where sci-fi got it wrong. Like the suits do not look, they actually got smaller, not bigger. I feel like they made the bet that like, suits are going to get bigger. I'm like, no. Yeah, they're not going to get bigger.
But just it was just, and they had to make it all gold. I was like, really?
Yeah, that's when sci-fi is eccentric. I think one of the issues with the genre sometimes, to your point, is that why you have to suspense your belief a little bit is because sometimes the science doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, but you like it when the science is kind of accurate. I think that's why I enjoyed Primer so much, is they at least tried to get it. And they didn't they didn't make it very edible. Like they kept it as technical as possible in that film, which made it more interesting.
Which is, I think, why Interstellar, I liked it, but I wouldn't say it's like, it's like people are like groveling over it because I think the hard part. So my whole point is, I think the hard part is if you're like
Balancing.
primer, if you're a primer, you're really constricted what you can do with. If he had a budget, he would still be restricted with the kind of like the science he wanted to follow, right? When you kind of suspend the science a little bit, you can start doing like these masterful set pieces, like we're seeing in this film. And I think very few films are able to like get the science sort of correct, and then also have these like, oh, this is amazing, you know?
Yeah, it was
I
just.
think it's difficult in the sci-fi genre. I think.
Look, I mean, they did it for suspenseful reasons, but it was just. Like I couldn't, and I guess it's the scientist in me. I just couldn't suspend my like. I couldn't reconcile that. I'm like, yeah, okay, you're gonna be exposed with some aluminum foil to -273, and
No,
you're gonna get a couple burns and be all hunky dory. I was like, all right.
Honestly, I was assuming that there were because Kappa's the main character. I thought they were both gonna die, so I was kind of surprised they did this whole scene where like, oh, James held on. I was like, he's supposed to be dead too. Like, like one
James,
person survived.
you're referring to Mace's character, right?
Yeah. Mace's character, Chris Evans.
Yeah.
I thought he was gonna die in that scene too, because it was, you know, everybody's hinting that everybody's gonna die. I was like, oh, it's a perfect time for him to die, and I was like, oh, he didn't. I guess he's gonna die later.
But yeah, but I was just like,
he should have died in theory in that scene actually. So
right, he would have been dead in 2 seconds there.
Yeah. But they have to make it. Oh, they hit the thing, and he's holding on, and they're helping it.
Yeah, like, and dude, this man is exposed to space, and plus, how is he breathing?
He should have died. That's why I said I thought he was gonna die. but then he survived, and I was just like, oh, okay, we did a ex machina here, so he'll die later. And actually, I'd rather he had died then, because the way he died in the end, I was like, okay, that's a terrible way to go.
Some of them are just like it was just like some of the act, and then him like freezing it. I was like, really? I don't know. There were some scenes that I had issue with in this movie.
So what's funny is that I think you read my mind. I was like, so you freeze now? That's my whole. I actually literally.
Exactly.
I was like, you could have just died like shooting the pin kicker stab you or something. No, you have to literally freeze. You could have frozen earlier in the movie.
Bro, you should have suffocated to death.
Yeah.
I was just like, there's so many like, yeah, I get it. You want the visuals. I was like, but at times like it's hard for me to suspend what is like possible from what is visually appeasing.
The two people who had like I think like the kind of like the I would say the cinematic deaths was Kaneda, and then we skipped over him a little bit. The psychologist, like the whole like he let the sun like go max on him, and he basically fried.
Yeah,
that was actually like one of the cooler like. I'm not saying death is cool, but that scene like that sequence was good. But other deaths were like terrible. I was just like,
oh, awful.
I was like, what is this? So they didn't all get equal treatment, you know.
No, not at all. But the other thing I sort of want to bring about for those of you who aren't too familiar with Greek mythology, I do like that they named the ships in the movie Icarus and Icarus II, because I mean clearly it's just a reference to the story of Icarus back in Greek mythology, where it's the flying horse that flies. Like that's where the whole expression "don't fly too close to the sun" comes from that story. So I like the sort of reference to Greek mythology in that. Because they're literally flying too close to the sun.
They are. It is I mean, that was on the nose kind of nod. I was just like, whatever. Yeah.
I know. I was like, of course. Like as the movie went on, I was like, yeah. The other scene that I guess it had some more religious imagery to me, I found kind of interesting was after they find Trey committed suicide, and Mace puts all the blame on. He puts all the blame onto Kappa's character. Then he takes some of Trey's blood and just smears it on his hands. And I was like, oh, okay, you're trying to go with a little Pontius Pilate imagery there too, where it's like in Pontius Pilate's case, he was trying to, say my hands are clean from the blood of Jesus. But in this case, he's just putting blood on his hands, saying, yeah, your hands are not clean here. It's all this is because of you or your decision at the beginning.
Yeah, and actually before that, right, they decided to basically kill Trey, right, because the oxygen.
Yeah.
And they have the vote then, and that's again you have another example of, do what must be done versus this is a human being, right? And
the ends justify the means.
Yeah, Cassie's like can't believe it, and she even and it's hypocrisy, right? Like May says, "Oh, we're not going to do it unless we all agree," and then she's the only one that doesn't agree, and then they do it. They were going to do it, but then it doesn't happen. But he took it into his own hands. But I thought that scene was also like indicative of kind of like what the strength of the movie was, which is really the internal struggles these characters have with the decisions they're
Sure.
making and the mistakes they're making, because they're making a lot of mistakes. That's why the mission is going to, you know, I don't want to say the bad word, but
sun.
It's going down the
hell.
toilet.
Or going to hell.
Yeah.
I guess there's some, I guess, puns there too. No way, because hell's very fiery.
Yeah. All right. So what about the? Okay, maybe we skip some other scenes, but I'm
so
curious.
I want to hold on.
Go ahead.
Before that, I wanted to circle back to something because you said something interesting. You said there were some parallels between I can't pronounce his name, the psychologist, right? And who was the villain in the film? It was Pin. I have it right here. It was Pinbacker. You said you drew some parallels between their two characters and flying, or their obsession with the sun. I wanted to see like if you could go into a little more detail on that, just to get your perspective.
Yeah. So I view like both of those characters and and like I said, they're still different, but where they kind of like have some overlap is, you know, the psychologist early, you get the sense like he's always like, I think the voice he's introduced is he's I think he's talking to somebody, but after this, I think his second most important scene is where he's staring at the, like you said, that 2 to 3% sun, potency. But he is like super obsessed, right? He asked Kaneda about it, and he's always thinking of the sun, and he's thinking of like, what does it mean? What's the interpretation? And in his role, if you think about it, why he's brought on the mission is to keep track of the mental health of the crew. That's really his job, right? But what's interesting is that he seems at times to be lost in like not the mission, but like the representation of what the sun is or something to him, and to maybe
some sort of existential idea.
Yeah, and it goes back to like Earth is suffering because there's no sunlight, right? And I think something that we don't appreciate enough in our day-to-day lives is that, if you're taking basic high school biology, you know that without the sun, like there can be no life on Earth as we know it for us. Right? We wouldn't survive without it. So in many ways, it goes back to like, like you're going back to the religious reference. Like when you think about the people before Christianity, right? The Egyptians had the Ra, and they had
we're all the sun god,
and the Greeks had even their own like god of the sun. I think it's Apollo. But like everybody like knew that the sun was like basically a deity, right? And I think in this movie they don't want to like have that kind of language because it'd be too over the top. But you see through the psychologist, I don't want to say his name, but I think it's like Seal or Surle or whatever.
Yeah, Surle.
But he has this almost like adoration, while I think his was still kind of like in the realm of like, okay, it's acceptable, healthy, it's nothing terrible. But then you see the other extreme with Pinbacker, that he became so obsessed that he thought like, okay, we need like, I'm being basically told like, because he says the sun's talking to me, right? He says those lines, right? He says like he speaks, with the sun, and so he's gone to such an extreme where he thinks that like the only way to like true peace is to basically invoke death, right? And it goes back to like the end of the world, kind of like what a lot of religions have in terms of like the end of times. And so in my opinion, like when I was watching it, what was interesting is that I saw basically in two different lenses kind of like the same kind of like, I don't want to say fundamentals, but same kind of like like not principles but pillars of like how they view the world, except one came from more of a curiosity and just like fascination, and the other one came out of like God wills it. We've heard this before, right? God wills it, he's speaking through me, and I mean, this is not alien to
for
us.
7 years he's spoken through me.
Yeah. And so I think it's a good, this is where I'll give the film some credit, where I think it's a good way to explore these topics without having like a theology lecture or some kind of like lectures, like you're able to pick apart like, oh, okay, like these characters in many ways compare, contrast. There are some comparisons, but there are some contrasts. So that's one of the movie's strengths, actually, I will say.
I find it kind of interesting. I was just thinking about this while you were talking, but with a different character, with the biologist who goes by her character's name is Corazon. I just found it interesting because, of course, they would choose Corazon as a Spanish word for heart. And because she's the one who takes care of the oxygen garden, basically without her, none of them would survive, right? because she is the one who sort of keeps them everything alive. So I think that was a not too subtle sort of symbol there, just in terms of like her character's name as well.
Yeah, yeah, it was a bit over the top there.
Yeah, so over the top there.
On the nose, yeah. Yeah, like this.
Which is sometimes what I have issues with. I was like, sometimes I prefer. Well, most of the time I prefer more subtlety. I'm like, when you're just being that on the top, I'm like, all right,
it's too much.
I was like, we get it.
And before we deviate to this topic, the other topic I was going to jump into is that, well, like I criticized with Cooley High, this film goes through a tone and then it just shifts like when
immediately,
and you're like, okay, come on. Like, now we're a suspense horror film, like especially how and this is from the top down, right? Not just the script writing, but even how they start using the camera now. Now it's all shaky. It's all like, I'm like going like, did I just sign up to watch like a horror movie now?
The Blair Witch Project.
Yeah, it's like, what is going on here?
Yeah, no, I get it. I agree with you.
I have to knock it there too, because it's like that's not like if anything, you make Cooley High look better because that was at least not as disruptive. I was just like, what is this, like a different movie?
Well, no, so the difference between Cooley High and that is it goes through tonal shifts all over the place, right? Part of what I enjoyed about that movie is it was sort of erratic and invoked tones all throughout. It was kind of like in waves, ebbs and flows. With this one, it's like it's almost two different films, right? In terms of, you have one that's just science fiction at first, where they're trying to problem solve, kind of Martian-esque, right? Things go wrong, and you got to try to figure out how to repair, your spaceship. And then second half, it's like there's an unknown entity who's the villain, and then it's like it was so abrupt where it was like, all right, this is a bit ridiculous. Whereas at least with Cooley High, you knew from the beginning it was kind of going to be like all over the place.
Yeah, and speaking of that sequence, is that the plot then, like, so let's say the first 65%, 70% of the movie, right? It's character driven, science is involved, bad science is involved, all those things. And then suddenly we get into
a lot of sort of existential, anxiety is definitely present in a lot of the characters. And
then now suddenly we're shaky cam, blurry shots, and now we even have scenes that are basically out of straight up horror films, right? Like, Cassie's with the knife and like, oh, is he coming? Chase scenes. I'm just like, I'm going like, okay, I'm stomaching this because this movie has been kind of intriguing, but what are we doing here? Like this is like way too erratic, And and I hold it against the movie a little bit. Like, I don't think you had to do that to have a really compelling end to this movie, because I think
I agree with you.
I think you could have had him survive and actually even be like maybe a little chase scenes, but nothing like suddenly what I'm watching, like you said, I'm watching like a suspense horror film. Like, give me a break. I'm not even buying it. I don't feel any suspense. This isn't like Gone Girl where I'm like on my chair, like what's going to happen next, dude?
And that movie just makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's the point of suspense, to make you uncomfortable. I was never uncomfortable. I was like, oh yeah, they're all gonna die anyway, so it doesn't matter.
I was never very uncomfortable. Yeah. You're right. I didn't get that feeling.
And so,
like, all right, there's a maniac on board who's supposed to represent a religious zealot. Okay.
And really, like, this is where I'm going to be harsh on the film, is that like at the last, let's say, like I said, 30%. There's really only two scenes I liked. Really, it was when, and that's because the music. You're right, underrated music. When he's doing the whole, like, he detonates the I think part of the ship or something, and he's like, he falls. That's the scene where he falls, right? You were mentioning earlier, and it plays the music. And I was like, oh, this is so like good. I was like, this is like a drug, dude. Like I rewatched it a couple of times, but I was thinking about, like, this scene is not, like, by itself is pretty like mediocre. Like, okay, he's trying to get out of the, he's trying to move across ships, but I was like, the music is what does it. And then the other scene is the end where, like, the spoil everybody, that he embraces the sun, right? Because even the one where they're at the cube and like they're being chased by a pinbacker, I was just like, okay, like this is weird, I don't know how you feel about the last, like, kind of finish.
I didn't quite like. It was predictable, is all I could say. Yeah. Like, that's how I felt. I've seen a lot. That was the issue with me in this film, is like, once you got to that point, any originality just went by the wayside. I've seen plenty of slasher films, movies in space that kind of follow the same structure, right? I don't know if you felt the same way.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of sci-fi movies, so that was stuff that, like, I'm kind of numb to.
Yeah, they kind of felt the same. Was there anything that you found unique about like the way that second half or the way it ended? No, not really.
No, just the musical score and that.
Yeah, the musical score was great. I'll give you that. Really throughout, and I'd say it was more interesting in the first half of the film, or first two thirds.
Yeah, I was gonna say definitely that first 2/3. I kind of wish it had a different ending. And look, I'm gonna have to. We talked about this offline earlier in the week, but I'm slamming my boy Garland. Like, what was this? What is
on this one? Maybe
what happened to you? What happened to
hold
you?
on, I think it was finding his footing, but we'll get to it.
Whatever. He also.
I
gotta go on my rant. He also crapped the bed on Dev. I'm sorry. I'm gonna be always saying this, dude. Okay, go ahead.
Man, I know how much you dislike Hulu show devs. Yes, I'm well aware. I'm not the biggest fan of it either. But I wanted to circle back. All right, so when they first get on Icarus 1, you see the whole ship is covered in dust. And I was like, that was interesting. And they were saying that basically they hinted because they said that 80% of dust is just, is human flesh. Or they didn't say quite like that, or it's like human skin. But that sort of insinuates that they were, like, the crew members were dead. But I wanted to get your sort of thoughts on when they first entered Icarus 1, what you were thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I assumed they had, like, all died. I actually even though, again, the little hints started kicking in that maybe somebody survived, I didn't see the dust thing. Like, I know that there was a reference, but when I saw them in the sunroom, what I guess to me the most important scene was really when they find the bodies in the sunroom, and they're all kind of like positioned like.
Yeah, they're positioned in a very interesting way.
Yeah, like almost like you would, in my interpretation, almost as if how we read about like old animal sacrifices, like, oh, like this is, I'm paying homage, it wasn't like, oh, they're just randomly there. It was like, there was some thought behind it.
I thought they might've been hugging.
Yeah, like you're right. It's hard because they were just.
I thought they were just embracing like this is the end. I don't know.
Yeah, it could have been like that, but like, but even when you like, they say you die, right? Like, or bodies, we know that they like, when they dig up bones, right? They're always like moving around. It seemed like somebody was always making sure they were in place. That was another hint that maybe somebody survived, because usually over time, like they would,
Well, I'm not so sure about that because that room is constantly exposed to the sun. So if anyone entered it, then he would die.
That's true.
So right. The only reason they were able to enter that room at that point, because the shields were completely down, was because Icarus 2 was blocking the sun's view into that room.
That is true. Unless Pinkbacker had some other way of doing it.
But how would he do it? What, is he just a deity at that point?
I don't know. The guy was kind of weird, so he didn't even look human. Maybe he can survive the sun.
He's immune to any radiation.
I don't know what he did in there, but he definitely did something to his body because he did not look human anymore. Yeah, that was interesting too. What do you think happened to his body? Because he didn't look human at all, and it didn't look like 7 years of aging. It looked like he disfigured.
We don't know.
himself.
Well, no, you see, even from the message from 6.5 years ago, something might have happened.
Yeah, some accident.
We have no idea.
We have no idea.
Speculation.
What's your speculation though?
I don't even know if I have a theory.
Oh.
Don't really know. I mean, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was going off that maybe what he did was, because I'm assuming the supplies were limited and probably the oxygen was limited, that he was probably like, I don't know what his background was. Like, was he just a captain? Was he like he said, like, was he
have expertise?
What was his expertise? Because I imagine that maybe he started experimenting on his own body to maybe prolong his life or to maybe.
How would he experiment though?
There's things on the ship. I don't know. Take random chemicals. I have no idea. Yeah,
I felt like what probably happened is he got too close to the sun at first, but survived.
And so that's why he's all burned, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because that's burned like.
I think that might have been happened when he might have had a revelation at that point when he had his experience of being too close to the sun and then burned, and that probably shifted his mindset.
That's true, because it probably affects like your everything. Yeah. I mean, they're just not. It's not disclosed to us, right? It's something.
Actually, that's the theory I'm going with. He was in the sunroom for too long, burned himself, and he had some metaphysical experience in his mind that led to his religious zealot transformation. Right, because they'd gotten that close, so I'm assuming he wasn't fanatical at the beginning.
Yeah, he was probably like the other captain, right? He was probably like focused on the mission, and then stuff
Yeah.
happened, and then his mind broke down, and he went crazy. He was basically
Oh, that's the. So that was the other scene I got to bring up that I didn't really that we didn't talk about earlier, but I thought I gave credit because I was like it was really cool. Part of the film that I haven't seen any other times was the Earth room. I was like, oh, that was a cool little touch.
We did skip that. Yeah, and they're all in that one. That's like the peak, like happy moment for them because they're all in there and they get to see. That was pretty cool. Yeah.
When you see the waves, and he's like, no, your recommendation for your recovery, basically, of because it was the psychologist's recommendation. You need peaceful scenes. He's like, no, the waves make me peaceful. And you see Chris Evans or Mace's character in there just enjoying seeing the waves.
Yeah,
splashing around. I don't know. I thought that concept for that because I could imagine you would have some sort of virtual reality room now that will sort of bring you because space I imagine is claustrophobic and really throws off your equilibrium. So if you have that sort of room to be able to decompress and bring you back to some sort of earthbound reality, then that would really help your mental health.
Yeah. I was gonna say another thing I think we glossed over was what did you. There's the ending, but this is gonna link to the ending. So you know how like Mace and Kappa fight earlier because of the Kappa takes a little bit extra time sending his message to home. I think it was a bit like, I guess it is foreshadowing, but it wasn't so on the nose where he said.
Well, you knew that from that point on that they were going to have conflicts between the two characters.
Yeah, but I mean his message to his sister was interesting, right? He basically tells her, if you see the sun like rise,
I know it was going to circle back to that.
Yeah,
this is foreshadowing.
Yeah, if you see the sun's rise, then we made it, even though I might not come back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the movie ends, right? I'm glad those humans in the fictional timeline survived, but I guess even that ending scene, I don't know if so. I want to hear your opinion. Like, did you need that scene? Because I almost feel like I could have just ended the movie with him embracing
Inferred?
Yeah.
You didn't need it, but it was just more on the nose that they really did succeed.
Yeah. Okay.
I
felt that it was like optional. Like I didn't really think that it took away or added much. Actually, maybe it would have been better if they didn't show it because you could have led to the audience interpretation. Whereas, did it work? Was it all worth it? And that could have been an interesting post-movie conversation with the viewers.
Oh, it could have been.
Because then,
but
then, go ahead.
I guess I think they want to be pretty optimistic with the ending of this film.
I guess I would be a different type of director. I like that. Ambiguity.
That's the difference between you and Boyle.
I would have preferred this ambiguity of like, did it work? Oh, if you're optimistic, you probably did believe, or maybe it didn't, and it was all waste of effort. Yeah, which would have been.
That's.
And then I would have done so.
You bring that. That's interesting. You bring that up because sometimes these film makers and directors, they get pressure from their producers or from studios to. They might have an idea of ending a film one way, but they'll say, no, it's either too complicated or too depressing, so you need to end it this way. Like, because it goes through a review process, right? And everyone has to kind of be on board. And I'll give sort of an example of where that difference between directors and like studio production like really clashed was actually in an Alex Garland film that we both, I think, really enjoyed, that being Annihilation, where at the end, Garland actually wanted to end that film with having a lot of different asteroids that would cause shimming events. He wanted to have just a scene of a bunch of those asteroids coming to Earth all over the place, right? I wanted to do a couple other things, but the studio's like, that's too complicated. We're not gonna do well because of our the audience is just gonna be too confused by like what you're trying to go for a deeper meaning. He's like, you need to end it this way. Get more simple. So sometimes it's not even up to the directors, it's just up to the studios and producers because their idea is we can't make it too complicated or we can't have a narrative that may make us lose money.
Yeah, no, I'm well aware of the
constraints.
The constraints that, especially if it's a bigger budget film with this big studios behind it.
Mm-hmm.
To finish my point was that I would have taken out that last scene, and then I would have done cryptic interviews, basically tipping either ending.
Oh, so hold on. The other thing I gotta, because you're talking about cryptic, that brought me the other really interesting part that we didn't bring on for Icarus 1, even though we're pretty close to wrapping up, was a subliminal imaging that was brought up in scenes as the crew was walking around Icarus One. What did you think about that? Or I don't know if you even caught it.
The subliminal imaging.
Yeah, you would see little images of people's faces, and like it was all black, and then like a little faint red images would pop in all over the place. If you didn't catch that, you should go back and see.
I might have to go back. Yeah, I might.
Yeah.
It doesn't click in my brain. Yeah, I don't know.
Really? I was like, what is going on? It was like the faces of like the other crew members and Kaneda's death. Yeah, there was subliminal imaging. Maybe you didn't even fully register it.
Yeah, it's because it's one of those things where it reminds me of like there's certain like psychological tests where they flash things. Yeah, I probably didn't register.
Top page from Reddit. Some scenes you may have missed.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on those scenes?
I think it was just to give. I'm not even sure exactly what was going on there. I just thought it was like kind of fascinating. I guess what. If anything, those subliminal images were more just a message that things just didn't end well. That's my guess. But there could be something deeper that I just didn't quite get it. Yeah, there were single frame photos.
Yeah. Oh, okay. What I do know is that in this film, listening to a lot of the cast members, they did really like question like their current like religious beliefs. I know that happened with.
Yeah, I know. Cillian Murphy actually went from being agnostic to atheist.
So I think the cast was like they were affected by making this film, which is interesting. That the only time I've read that was the crew that did the Passion of the Christ. That was the only other time I've actually heard cast members go like, "Oh, I was doing a job, but man, this job changed me."
Well, the other one that you can clearly point to was unfortunate. May he rest in peace, but the actor that played the Joker in The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
I mean,
I meant the religious context, but yes, the actor, what's his name, Heath Ledger. He got way into the role and probably.
There's some people get lost into a role.
Yeah, exactly. I think he probably got lost into the role. I was gonna say that. I have to maybe view those single frame.
Yeah, go back because it's very interesting. It's when they're going and looking when they first board Icarus One. You see like quick, and I was trying to like. This was one of the points where I kept pausing because I was like, wait, what was it? And I was trying to catch the like. Kept play pause on the images. I couldn't catch them; they were so quick in the single frame photos, and it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting and unique. So I will. I totally did not. I totally didn't. I miss it.
I feel like they've used that sort of tactic in video game storylines before, but I've never seen it in like a movie like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the what it is. It's like there's little. Scenes of single frame photos of the images of the Icarus One crew.
I gotcha. Interesting.
I don't know. It was kind of interesting.
I'll definitely admit I missed it because it didn't click in my brain when you mentioned it. So, but I mean, this movie,
like subliminal images. Like what?
This movie in general didn't really click in my brain, but when we get to ratings, I'll get there. But
I mean, that was pretty much the last point of it. It had some decent moments in this movie, and some things that I was just like, this is kind of cliche. Like they could have done a better job in the screenwriting of this.
Yeah. So, do you have any like final like conclusions, thoughts on this film?
Not really. I think we can get into ratings at this point, unless there's anything you really want to bring up.
No, I mean the one thing I'll say is the music score is.
Really the music score was definitely a plus for this. I'll definitely agree with you. I've said that a couple times in this. But yeah, so Chicho's, and I'll have you go last. And it sounds like you have a lot of opinions on this film. For me, personally, I thought, so I'll just preface before I give my score. I thought some of the strong notes were several of the characters' performances. I thought the psychologist, I'm not even going to try to, but Cliff Curtis's character was very good. It's pretty convincing. I really enjoyed Cillian Murphy's role in this. I thought his character, the way he approached being a physicist, he actually went to CERN and spoke with several prominent physicists to try to mirror their mannerisms. I thought he actually did a really good job in his performance, in his role as I'm blanking on his character's name, in his role in this film. And I really enjoyed, I thought Chris Evans' character as Mace, I thought he did a really good job as well. What I really disliked was the subsequent transition from essentially typical sci-fi, trying to problem solve issues that arise on a dangerous space mission to becoming, having a clear villain that's sort of this like horror slasher. It gives it a horror slasher feel, which I didn't like about this sort of movie. And yeah, that really sort of irritated me at times watching this film. So yeah, those are some of the strong points and some of the not so strong. I also didn't like that, some of the subtle metaphors they were giving were a little too on the head. I know I brought this up, that's sort of a personal pet peeve of mine when watching certain films. And this, like, for example, when we were talking about Corazon, I was like, really? Like that's a little too on the nose. Like there's no sort of subtlety in terms of your symbolism that you're trying to approach with this film. But I did like really what you were talking about with Kaneda scene when he goes the sort of, I could imagine if you had a huge screen with a very large sound system or like an IMAX theater, that would be very, very visually stimulating to watch. But personally for me, after all that, I would give this film a 7 out of 10.
Man, you're so generous, dude. Okay, you have any more thoughts? Or you want me to jump in?
It might be, 7 might be. It was 6.5 to 7, and it was more because I did enjoy individual roles in this movie.
So to prepare the audience, if I remember, it's my last week's score. I gave Coolie High a 6, and I think this movie's worse than that movie. So just see what's coming, dude.
I'm expecting. Hold on, before you give it, give my prediction. A 5.
Almost, dude. 5.5.
So we'll see.
But yeah. So I kind of agree with all your points around that. I like the cast. I did have issues with some of the science. I think you had more issues, but even the
that was a knock. But it's science fiction. You kind of have to suspend it.
The fiction, yeah, and the whole changing, what's the term? Changing the tone of the film really threw me off. And I criticized Coolie High on that, and this was even worse. So just imagine how I felt.
Well, at least Coolie High had some novelty, which I don't think this film really had.
Exactly. And so, I think one of the issues definitely I had with this movie is if I take out the 3 scenes I liked, would I even want to watch this movie? And I asked myself like throughout the week, and I was like, no. And actually, I was debating between 5 and 5.5, but the music was so good that I'm going to like give it an extra point. Without the music, this movie's a 4.
The musical score is so good.
Yeah, it gives it an extra point, which is credit to the composer. Whoever that guy is, deserve the paycheck that we paid him, because he made the movie that much.
He saved it a bit.
Because honestly, like the music was like, especially when Kappa's doing like that's big scene where he's doing like moving, he's jumping with the suit. It's like, oh, what a musical score. Yeah, I think to your point, maybe because I've seen a lot of sci-fi movies and TV shows, I thought there were so many cliches that I've seen so many times before, and I've seen the religion topic tackled before, but I've seen it better.
Yeah,
I've seen it better. I've seen it properly done in Battlestar Galactica, other shows, and I've seen like the whole spaceship exploration better in Interstellar and other movies. So it's like maybe if I watched it in 2007, I would have given it a higher rating. But now watching it in 2020, I'm like, I wouldn't even want to watch this like ever again, really.
No, I'm never gonna watch this movie again.
Yeah, and so if somebody tells me like, oh, like, I want to watch this. Like, let's say we're at the hanging out like with buddies, right? And somebody says like, "Oh, I want to watch Sunshine." Oh, does anybody have complaints? I'm gonna be like, "Is there anything else first?" No, seriously, I'm gonna be like, "Is there anything else?"
I would say the same. Yeah.
Because if it's like nobody's seen it, then obviously I would comply. But I would not be like, "Oh, 2 of us have seen it. I loved it so much." Not really. It's one of those films that like it's crazy because I was looking up Danny Boyle's like other films that he's done, like 28 weeks later or days later, one of those.
Yeah, I get it.
We've seen Train Spotting. I've seen some other ones that I won't name because I want to keep those in the bullpen. And I genuinely love those movies. They're really good. Like Slumdog Millionaire, like one of them. Like and it was.
So I've never seen Slumdog.
It's really good, but it's my bullpen's getting big, so I can't really like keep adding things. But like there's other movies that he's made. Like Train Spotting is maybe the example I'll just hit with. That I go and I know it's a different genre and everything, but I was like, that film is really, really good. And this is like, and I know that's different, and it's different, screenwriter and
So
look,
what I will say,
and Garland,
what,
I have to rip him again for
yeah. What I will say with
little,
Boyle, this does show his
he's got range,
versatility. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the other and here's my little bias also is that I've picked 3 films basically that I've went based off like what I've read, what I've heard on the internet. So I picked Burning, which was on the off the hip.
Fantastic.
I picked I Am Daniel Blake, that was off the hip a bit. And this one, and this is the worst one out of those 3 that I picked because the other 2 are really good. Burning was like amazing, and even I Am Daniel Blake was like a really solid film. As I even think more about it now, like it's
right.
It's like, and then I'm like, this is like not as good. So yeah, my rating is basically 5.5 out of 10. And if you watch it, and I know there's going to be probably people who really like this movie, and they're going to call me hater. The only thing I would press upon the audience as a counter argument is list your favorite 5 sci-fi films and be honest with yourself, you're really going to put it in your top 5. And I think a lot of people, they tend to, especially with like niche, and I do this with some films too myself, but with like kind of like cult fan bases, they tend to maybe overrate a film a little bit, because I kept reading, oh, this is so underrated, it's underappreciated. And I watched it and I was like, is it? Is it really? So this isn't like Primer, where I felt like it was such a unique experience, where this definitely was underappreciated, underrated.
Yeah.
This was in theory a blockbuster if you look at the budget.
Yeah, and it was a big budget, and it was underwhelming to me.
Yeah, and you think of the director, right? It's not like his first film, right? He's already directed many films at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, the cast, like, okay, maybe Chris Evans isn't what he is today, but he's still up and coming.
Cillian Murphy was he was rising at that point.
Yeah, he was huge. He was rising at that point, and that's pretty much where I'll leave it.
The actress that played in Troy as well, she was well known.
Yeah, so that's where I'll leave it. Is that for the amount of resources they had, I would expect a better film. And maybe it was the studios that got their hands in there. I don't know all the behind the scenes. Excuse me.
As you well know, from what you have, you sent me that video from. Oh my gosh, who is the famous dude who wrote it? Jane Silent Bob.
We did Clerks. It was
Clerks. I was trying to remember his name.
Kevin Smith.
Yeah, Kevin Smith has a great he has a great talk where he's explaining how he really had issues with he would have accepted doing a film, but producers really gotten their grubby hands in the way, and they really stunt some of the creative really good choices that directors would usually go. But they're like, no, I'm not going to give you this money unless you include this scene or that scene. That ends up being really stupid.
Yeah, so that was my rating, but I wanted to say one final point of this episode is this is why I think we're living in a mini golden age of a certain type of cinema that I enjoy personally, is because with technology improving cameras and making it more affordable for directors to take smaller budgets to do films that are more maybe character based. I think that's why we're seeing a lot more of these newer studios that are not like Fox and Paramount. I'm thinking of A24 that we've seen some of their films already. Well, like the one that what's his name directed his debut with mid 90s with Jonah Hill. Like it was these other studios are coming around, giving these, I wouldn't say like no budget, but let's say like a decent budget to make a film and give them the creative license. And I think that's why we're seeing in the last like 4 or 5 years a lot of films that are different versus like I think it was harder to do that when you really had the big studios in the 90s and 80s kind of dominate like what are the blockbusters, right? And then the true indie films were ones were really indie films, like they were like no budget, and we've covered some of those, but you can definitely see that like now if you're an independent director, there's places to go. It's hard still, but there's still places to go that you have definitely more resources. And I think that's in part because of the growth of film, but also I think the camera technology has gone better, right? You don't need like the same. It used to be like studios had all the goods, right? They had the best sound mixers, they had all the cameras, they had the sets.
Now everything is, it's consumer based, where anyone can sort of buy anything.
Yeah, and so I think that's allowing a lot of indie films to flourish, and I think. We'll continue to cover ones that haven't. Like I love saying that now in my bullpen. And actually, Burning's one of them. Like Burning's a film that I looked at the studios, and they're not like, Disney, you know. Oh my god, if Disney made Burning, I think the world would end for me.
It would have been bad.
But that's pretty much
I have a film coming up. I think that you're going to enjoy. It's a more indie film. That's, from what I've read, it's supposed to be very good, and it's got a pretty small budget. It's in the coming weeks.
I'm trying to actually look up the Burning budget. It doesn't say.
It was decent because it was a very well-known director in Korea.
Yeah, but it came from a studio that like it's not like the typical Hollywood, you know. LA,
right.
You know, I think the production company was actually NHK, which is actually a Japanese broadcaster. So that's where. And then there was two other ones that I never heard of, like Pine House Films. But that's I guess that's evidence for my point that like if there's good films and you really it's still tough for any director and writer and actors, but now there's a little more opportunities to have more independence. Because I think one of the problems I think we agree on this is that
you're democratizing filmmaking.
Yeah, is that like we have studio like execs that only care about like bottom line and only care about box office numbers, and so if they have to change the script like 100% to make it more sellable for merchandise. They'll do it, and I think unfortunately that takes away from authentic art, you know. Yeah, and so I have huge issues with the Hollywood LA industry. Even though
I 100% agree.
So
I mean, how many times can you make this basically the same Marvel movie back to back to back to back, or Transformers movie?
No, and well, until people stop buying it, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I'll leave it at that. And yeah, I think unfortunately I missed the mark on this one, so I take full responsibility.
It happens. I mean, the potential was there.
I was rolling the dice so well. I was rolling the dice. So I was like, I got to keep it going. And I was like, no, going back to my bullpen.
I mean, you can't always like go with just really good films. So you need to show, I guess, some diversity. So, I mean, we're even biased. Some people really enjoyed this film. Personally, I think we've seen enough sci-fi where we both really didn't. We thought it sort of was lackluster compared to other films we've seen. But part of showing a film like this is it shows basically a film where we both really had issues with it, and it shows sort of where we're both coming from in terms of films that we don't particularly enjoy.
Yeah, and I think, remember when we started this podcast, we're also trying to take chances on movies that we've heard about, you know, we didn't really watch, you know, and this is one that I had never watched before, so it's off my list. Yeah, so it's off my list. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the other reasons for him.
Yeah, anyway, but stay tuned. I think that's it, unless you have any other final thoughts.
No, that's my rant. That's my last rant.
All right. Well, if you enjoyed our commentary, please like and subscribe on this week's film, Sunshine. Next week, we will be reviewing, speaking of indie films, it was a film that had a pretty small budget, but it's known by a pretty well-known horror director at this point in time, which is Mike Flanagan. We will be reviewing his first film, which was Absentia, which came out in 2011. And neither I nor Chris have seen this film before, so we'll see whether or not we enjoyed this film. So stay tuned for next week. Bye.